So to get into working with formatting text in InDesign, as I said before, if you guys are familiar with Illustrator and working with a type tool, like usually we're used to just being able to click and start typing. You can't do that in InDesign. You have to have a frame. And you can either create a frame with your frame or rectangle tool, or you can create it with the type tool in InDesign just by clicking and dragging. And there's your type frame, and now you can sort of arbitrarily type as I am here. Oops. And then like any other program, I'm just going to grab this. With opening our character palette, I just went to typesetting, so most of our typesetting tools are here. But like in our character palette, if you wanted to change typefaces, we'll go to marker felt. So you're selecting like the whole frame basically, and making those changes. You know, if you wanted to change the point size, the leading, you know, make it super huge, etc., etc. This handles pretty much across the board in a similar way to, in a similar way to anything in Adobe. The character palette works the same way through the Adobe Creative Cloud now family. So things that we talked about again: type size, leading, kerning and tracking. And you can see here, like if we adjust our tracking, so it's like super wide. But you can even see when we adjust our tracking, some of these, like the introducing, is fairly nicely evenly spaced. But then here, it seems a little tight. The Smith seems a little tight. So this is where I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but this is where you would adjust your kerning versus your tracking. And I just double-clicked to get my cursor, as you can see as I go in between. So if you wanted to make these a little bit wider to sort of match this Christopher here, this is an odd font to do it with because it's more of a display font. But display fonts versus serif and sans serif fonts. Display fonts are like those more funkier fonts that we're kind of familiar with. Like the handwriting fonts, like this is a marker. I just randomly picked it, but it's a marker font. So you'd have like some of those brush fonts or handwriting fonts or anything that's a little bit funky or distressed, or those more out there fonts or display fonts, because they don't fit within. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but generally they don't fit within that serif or sans serif family. So anyway, let's say we want to widen this a little bit to match this Christopher. So you would put your cursor in between each letter, and here you adjust your kerning. There we go. I wanted my thing to pop up. And you can see you have your the thumbnails, like the V and the A with this cursor in between, where here the V and the A is highlighted, so you're adjusting the overall space. So just sort of arbitrarily, I'm going to bring that, I'll bring this way up. And they're not going to be all even, because again, it's going to depend on, you know, letter to letter. And you can kind of take a look and then bring these all way up. But again, this is a little bit of an odd font to start with. But you can see just by adjusting the kerning and the tracking, it's a little bit more even. I could probably tighten this up a little bit, but it's a little bit more even. It matches this tracking. Generally, if you're using tracking, you're going to have to kern a little bit as well, or sometimes you could just use the kerning to adjust your letter spacing. Did I see a question, Chip?
Well, this is where I get confused, because on here, I'm finding till you get up to kerning and tracking.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be looking for a K or a T,
Mm-hmm.
and it says VA.
Yep, because so, yeah, exactly. It can be kind of confusing because the thumbnail isn't exactly like.
So how do we know that's kerning and tracking?
So if you look at the thumbnail, if you hover over it too, there we go. So if you hover over it, your smart hints or whatever they're called will pop up. So you have kerning there, and then my mouse doesn't want to work. and then if you hover over tracking, but you can tell by the thumbnail, and the reason that they're showing a VA, I guess they could have arbitrarily used any other combo of letters, but I think they were just, I don't know, using the VA because they're both nice angled letters, I guess. But you can see like you essentially have your cursor, you have that line between the V and the A, and then the little arrow pointing to that line, that's what you're adjusting, is that space. And then here you have the VA, almost looks like it's highlighted, and then the arrows go to the edge. So the tracking is going to adjust. Again, if you select just the whole block, your tracking will adjust the entire block, or it basically has to be 3 or more. It's a group of letters, but it essentially has to be 3 or more, because if you're doing 2 letters, you're essentially kerning. So even if you wanted to have this, for whatever reason, adjust that tracking, and you can type in whatever you want as well. Oh, apparently that's way too much. Oh, because I'm on the wrong thing, see? I meant to be on tracking rather than kerning. So let's set that kerning to like 400, so you can see that the whole set of letters gets wider. And again, a lot of times you'll have to use a combo of kerning and tracking together to sort of get the ideal that you want. But basically, this is where the smart hints help with distinguishing between those two. Just hovering over them, kerning. But again, that little arrow kind of points to the space, and then you have the arrows go to the edges of the group that you have highlighted. The other thing that you need to be wary of, it popped up in another class, is being careful with, these look somewhat similar. And generally, anytime there's a T, you're formatting the text. So you want to be careful that if you're, let's say you want to adjust the tracking of this, and you go to here, and you go, the giveaway should be its percentages, and there's also no negatives. Whereas here, like, you can go to -100 if you want to really squish them together. I have my caps lock on. So if you go here, and let's say you want to adjust your tracking to 200, and you go there, and you're like, oh, like that looks a little weird. Basically what you're doing is you're formatting the type. You're not actually formatting the tracking, which I understand, especially if you're new to this. The palettes can be confusing. So you just need to keep an eye out for that. Again, the dead giveaway is that there's, for tracking and for kerning, that you can have 0, or you can have negatives, which basically bring things closer together, and then positives, which bring them further apart. So if you go to adjust your tracking and you're here and you just see percentages and you don't see any negatives, you're actually formatting the type, not the you're formatting the type, not the space between the type, right?
That would be the points to the type, like the whole letters you use.
Correct. Yep. Paragraph panel works similar to most word processing programs that we're familiar with, right? You can format the paragraph here, centered, right justified, left justified, justify the line with having it end with a right, or having the last line end left justified, center, right, or I always forget what this one is called, full justified, justify all lines. You can also set your indents, which we get into specifically a little bit later. You know, if you have an indent, you can set your indent for an entire paragraph. You can set your right indent, so that's going to do the whole paragraph. So wherever there's a return, so if we do for, like, wherever there's a return there, versus a line indent, which is here. And again, if you hover over these things, they'll show you. So you want to do, you know, your first line indent rather than your paragraph indent. And you can also set the indent on the last line as well, which is super handy. Space before and space after is also super handy. We talk about, sorry, I'm just looking at my notes again. Talked about that. Okay. Space before and space after. A lot of times when we talk about like when you want to have like a hard return versus a soft return, like this would be a soft return. Sometimes we want to place a hard return. A lot of times we want to just hit enter or return another time. With most word processing programs, that's fine. But what can end up happening is when you get weird formatting things, if you're opening, like opening a Word file, I don't know if there's other applications that will open Word files, but sometimes when you open a Word file in another program, the formatting can get a little funky. So technically, with and this is where we're talking about publication specifically, you want to have the space after adjusted. So if you want to have a return, like a hard return, essentially, you're adjusting that space after rather than hitting 2 returns. So that way, when you're outputting this thing for various printers, they don't have any formatting issues, right? Instead of hitting like 3 returns, you know, they might not have. There's a variety of things that can go wrong when a printer opens either an InDesign file or PDF with character formatting. So this is where you want to make sure that instead of hitting 2 returns, you're adjusting that space before, rather that space after, you know, space after the return there. And you can have them, you know, here you can have them adjusted to different, you know, we'll go 625 there versus 1875 there. So you can have different spaces. So this allows you to adjust the space after, the space in between bodies of, or paragraphs of text rather. It allows you to be able to adjust them a little bit more finely. That's not a word, but you know what I mean. Instead of just hitting, like if you wanted almost, you know, if you wanted more space here, instead of hitting return 4 or 5 times, et cetera, et cetera. So you get the formatting here. Drop caps we talked about a little bit here. So we can have your drop caps. I wanted this to, there we go. So this is the number of lines that your cap drops. So obviously if we set it for, I don't even know why they have 1 as a default, because if you have a drop cap on 1 line, it's the same, right? You have a capital letter. I don't know why it just doesn't automatically bump to 2 lines. So you can have your drop cap drop to 2 lines, 3, 4, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure you guys have seen this in books and publications where the first letter. A lot of times too, you can set the character, so you can have that drop cap be 1 or more characters. So if you wanted, this is going to sound weird, but if you want the bigger, or, you know, occasionally you don't, I feel like you don't see this as much. Like occasionally you'll have like, I don't know, like if it's like Thursday, like generally they don't break up words too much, but sometimes you'll see that with like names or something. I feel like you don't see the drop caps with entire words all that often. More commonly you see it with just one letter. But you can have it go, you know, as many characters as you want, really. Generally you don't do it that much, but so that's manipulating drop caps. Shading border we're not going to worry about now. Hyphenating or not hyphenating. It's somewhat personal preference. Personally, I can't stand hyphenating unless it's like purposeful. So I always, by default, I always have hyphenating off. And that will do it for the whole block. It should do it for, if you select, yeah, there we go. Now it's going to do it for the whole. There we go. So if you want to do it for the whole block of text, you can either hyphenate per paragraph. So like I did before, there we go. So let's say here, I'm trying to see if there's another hyphen somewhere else though. Yeah, there's one here. Okay, so right here we have a hyphen, and then right here we have a hyphen. So if we're at this paragraph and we turn off hyphenate, it's just going to do it for the paragraph that you're on, right? So it knows that you're only working where you have a return, right? So it's not going to do it to this. So if you want to have it hyphenate for the entire block of text, which I generally do, you want to make sure you go back to your selection tool and have the whole block selected. And now you can see we have this little like half check because we had one that was checked and one that was not. So when I click it again, it's going to go back to hyphenate. And now when I click it off, now you can see there's no hyphens at all. And you can see it does affect your formatting a bit, obviously. I just, as a personal preference, I hate hyphenation. I don't know why, it just bugs me. So usually whenever I design anything, I always turn it off. I did mention it, I believe, last class, superscript and subscript. With character styles, you can, or rather characters, you could set here. Basically, it's the superscript and subscript is trying to find a good spot to show you. Let's select this, and if you want it superscript, it knocks that letter up above wherever you're going to have it. A lot of times you'll have that with like footnotes. So where you have like, let's go back all the way back a little bit. So let's say you have, I don't know, whatever. Like you have a footnote here, and it's footnote 3. Like generally, you'll drop that down a little bit and bring that up so you have that. I'll zoom in a little so you can see. So you have that. It's probably a little too far, but you get the idea. So you have that superscript. So the superscript is above, and then subscript, which you see here and there, is below the baseline. So occasionally you'll see that subscript. It just depends on the usage. Again, the most common one is the footnotes. Usually you'll have that footnote as a superscript. So you can have you can set those as well. Underlining and all that fun stuff we already have. Font searches. You can search fonts. You can have it set to search the entire font name, which I generally kind of leave as a default, or search the first word only. So again, if you did like, start to type Helvetica, it brings up all the different versions of. So you can search for fonts if you have a specific font you're looking for. Let's see what else we need to show you before we move on to formatting. Typekit we'll go over a little bit later. I honestly don't really use Typekit too much. Typekit allows you to, it's a Creative Cloud thing, so it allows you to kind of like share fonts. So if you want to add fonts through Typekit, like if you had, usually it applies to like a workplace. So if you had a server storing fonts, you wouldn't have to worry about having missing fonts on your machines specifically. Like let's say this classroom is a publishing company. To make sure that we all had the same fonts, we would use Typekit. So that way, if we were missing a font, we could just add it through Typekit from the server. That's something more specific to the working environment. We talked about formatting paragraphs a little bit. If you wanted to have, we talked a little bit about pull quotes. So if you wanted to have, you can adjust your right, as we talked about. You can adjust your right and left indents. So if you wanted to have here, if you wanted to have a pull quote, let's say we'll throw the space after. Oops. Right. Why is that not wanting to work? I'm not understanding. Oh, probably because I have an indent. So if you want to adjust your space after or have a pull quote and change, the character style here to Helvetica Bold, for example. And then we'll adjust the indents. Oops. Right? As this isn't doing anything. Or have it centered, for example. There we go. There we go. So you can have that centered. You can adjust again, adjust those indents if you wanted to have something centered, but move this. Oops, that went outside the text frame. If you wanted to have this other line indent either right or left, you can adjust those indents. But for now, we'll just use this as a pull quote. And then you can see this whole thing is formatted a little bit oddly because I'm just showing you all the different things that we can do, leading us to formatting paragraphs and formatting text is what we've been doing this whole time, right? And making any of these kind of changes is formatting your copy. The other thing you need to be aware of, which we have here, I don't think we have any, no, close-ish here. When you hyphenate or also take off hyphenation, sometimes that can lead to having to reformat for widows and orphans. So widows and orphans are words or single lines of text that become separated from other lines and paragraphs. It's kind of a sad term for using text. But so orphans are left alone at the bottom of a page, and widows are at the top. I'm sure we've all seen it where if you have, you're writing a one-page paper and, you have 2 words or you have a word that goes on to the next page. So that would be an orphan, or that would be a widow, rather, at the top of the page. So you want to format so that goes back to the next page. And then the orphans are left alone at the bottom of a page. Similar to, I mean, this is close, but like this is technically an orphan, I guess. But if you had dog just by itself, a lonely text orphan. So that's where some paragraph formatting, or even formatting your text frame, for example. And right now, so I'm just resizing the text frame. You can see the text move within the frame as I'm formatting. What I'm doing is I'm holding down Option, and Option allows you to adjust both sides at once. And it does it from the middle so that way you're even on both sides. So even if you wanted to, where was it? Give or take about, see, there we go. The dog at the bottom of the page is a nice little dog orphan. So even bringing it down to like there isn't much, but that helps format that last line so there's not such an orphan left there. Formatting paragraphs, which we've been doing. Soft returns we talked about. So specifically for the next assignment, we're going to start talking about character and paragraph styles. So all the things that we've been doing, like I said, I've been doing, are all related to character and paragraph styles. So having this be, let's go back to our character. So we have Helvetica bold, 16 point with a 19.2 point leading. That's a character style, right? So the Helvetica bold at 16 point is a character style. The paragraph style would be that it is centered justified, and any kind of indents or anything that you would set here. We have an indent. I'll bring that back to 0. So if you wanted that indent to be a little bit, a little bit bigger, so it drops down this a little bit more. Obviously, it's a little bit off center, but you get the idea. So that would be formatting the paragraph. You can turn any of this formatting into a style, which is basically when you create a style, it allows you to have a group of formatting attributes, like I said, font size, color, tracking, leading, etc. So even if we went with color here, and then I change my workspace, so now I don't have, here we go, text color. So let's say we wanted like a nice greenish color there. We'll get into specifics of color, of coloring later. So when you're selecting, just as a side note, when you're selecting the text color, you'll see that there's a little T in our color box, which tells us that we're filling the text with color, rather than if we selected the frame, it's blank. So at that point we would be, if we change the color, or changing the color of the frame, right? We get into specifics with another assignment about that, but you just want to make sure that when you're formatting the color of text, that you want to make sure that that little T is there, or that you're using your text tool, which I'm on right now. You're using your text tool, which you can either go, what I realize I've been doing, going back and forth from the move tool to the text tool. You can just select your text tool and then jump in wherever you want to jump in and select. If you're on your selection tool, either of the selection tools, and you double click into a group of text, it automatically goes to the text tool. I realize I've been doing that and I didn't tell you guys that. So if you double click into any kind of like text area, it automatically jumps you to the text tool. So anyway, so all this stuff is formatting. So let's say we wanted to save. You can save a group, a set of styles. So font size, color, tracking, paragraph formatting, all that fun stuff, and you can save it, and then you can use those styles to apply to other things to keep your work consistent, and also so you don't have to keep going back. There's ways to copy it, but that way you don't have to keep going back and be like, oh yeah, what was this one? This was 16 and 2. Okay, I want this to be, you know, for argument's sake, I want this to be the same as this. So then you have to go back and change every single attribute, right? Instead, there's a couple different ways to do it. This is the easiest way. Our assignment walks us through setting it up a different way as well. But if you select this block of text and you go to character styles, you'll see right now we have no character styles. We're going to hit create a new style, and since we have something highlighted, it's going to create a style based on what we have selected, right? And you'll see it just defaults to character style 1. You can double click it and you bring up more advanced options. You can name it, so we'll call it like, call this one Helvetica Green. You have your general, which usually I just change the style name. You can have styles based on other styles within the document. Right now there's none because there's no styles in the document. And then you have your basic character formats, and you can see that it already has the stuff filled in. The Helvetica bold 16 point. The leading was just default, so that's why it's here. So if you wanted to set the leading to 24 point, let's say. Then you have advanced, where you can have all of your baseline shifts, vertical, horizontal, scale, etc. Color, it's already going to default to this green unnamed color that I picked. Open type, we're not going to worry about. And then underline options, you can have underlines, strike throughs, or export tagging for exporting to different publications. So once you set your styles, we're going to hit OK. And then now you can apply that style to that two other blocks of text. You can set the tracking, by default it just kept the same tracking. You can set the tracking, I believe. Let's go through. Yeah, you can set the tracking in the kerning. Generally, I mean, if you wanted to set the tracking, you could. I wouldn't set the kerning in a character style because the kerning is going to be different, you know, application to application. So that allows you to set those styles so that you have basically a default, so you don't have to go back and set each change here. And then you can even do it with paragraph styles. So let's grab this paragraph, and that's the same thing. So any of the attributes that we have the drop cap, I think we have an indent, space after, space before, all that fun stuff. We're basically just going to do the same thing. We're going to hit that little new, it looks like a little page. So we're going to create a new paragraph style, and again you can see it does the same thing. Paragraph style 1, we can call it like drop cap, and we get a little bit more options because it's the paragraph style. So again, you can format the characters where it's going to default to this. So if you wanted to have a paragraph also include character styles, you can, or character attributes, I should say. Right now I'm just going to leave it as the default. So you have the character format and the advanced character formats like you do for character. Here's where you have your indents and line spacing, any tabs, any paragraph rules, borders, etc. Paragraph shading, hyphenation. You can set your hyphenation as well if you do want hyphenation on. So you can have it, if you wanted to have it with at least words with at least 10 letters, so that way it hyphenates those letters. And basically what it does is if it's under that, it'll just drop it down to the next line. Justification, you can set your spacing justifications. These we'll worry about later. Nested styles, you can have essentially styles, which we'll get into with more advanced things, but you can have styles within styles, kind of those nested styles. Bullets and numbering, character color, and again the open type and underline, blah, blah, blah. So right now we're just going to hit OK. And then you can see we have our drop cap paragraph style. So then we can go to here, and theoretically we shouldn't have to select this whole paragraph, right? Just as long as it knows that we're in a paragraph. And then we hit that drop cap, and it makes the drop cap, right? So it's basically sets of presets that you can come up with. That way you can apply them to various things. And also, if you change any paragraph style, so let's go back to our drop cap style. Go back to our drop caps. So let's say we want 2 lines instead of 4. I'm going to check preview. We want 2 lines instead of 4. Yep, it formats it for everything in the document that uses that style. So anything in that entire document, so if you had 100 paragraphs in here that had one style, once you change that style, it will make all the changes for you, so that way you don't have to go back through and change every single paragraph to that one style, right? Does that make sense? So that's the other handy way that can help. Also, it should, watch it prove me wrong, should work with character styles. So let's say we wanted to change that character color to red. Yep, there you go. I just checked preview just to make sure, so we'll hit OK. So anywhere, like let's say you decide that the green looks terrible and we're going to go with red, you change that character style, and anywhere that character style appears, it's going to change it to the new character style, right?
Can you unlink it then also individually? Like,
you can. You would just. Yep. You can kind of. Yeah, I can't think of a better word from unlink either. But
let's say the top one I wanted it to be 4 and the bottom one I wanted it to be 2. Right.
Yep.
I'm doing that on the fly. Can I
Yep. You would essentially.
Remove the character style.
Yep.
From it, I guess is what
Yeah, you would essentially either just change it. Like if you wanted this, like let's say you had drop caps on all these paragraphs, and then you didn't want it on this one.
Right.
You could just manually go in here and just go into your paragraph, and then had this one go to 4, and then that way, that way it's sort of more individual.
But then if you went back and changed, let's say you go and use that character, that paragraph style again, will it then go back and change that again?
It shouldn't, no.
Okay.
Because now you're not in that paragraph style, so it should automatically know that you're not. It should. Let's try it. It should automatically know. Oops. Unless you change this. Well, we went to 2. Where's my drop cap? There we go. Yeah, no, so it doesn't change that one because now it's out of that paragraph style. So basically you just need to make one change to the style, and then it's no longer associated with the style, right? So once we made, I'm going to hit OK. Once we made this change to where we physically went in, well not physically, but you know what I mean, we individually went in and changed that drop cap to 4 lines, it's not associated with this paragraph style anymore. Correct. Yep, because it's not. We've essentially broken that by altering one of the things, right? So that's what we're going to be working with for our assignment. Other things you can have, which I'll go over later. Editing text, you can do the find and replace, kind of like you can in Word, which is kind of interesting or handy. You can have dictionary preferences. You can have it learn words like I have every time I get a new version of Illustrator or a new-ish computer. I have to have it learn my last name because I just get tired of seeing the red underline. Dynamic spell checking. You can have the autocorrect or dynamic spell checking as well, like any other word processing program. So these are just various ways that we can style. You can style copy within InDesign that works very, very differently from Illustrator.